Hello friends, I welcome you all to another edition of Daily News Analysis. So in this particular edition, we are going to discuss some very important articles that are part of Indian Express, The Hindu as well as PIB. The first article that we are going to discuss is about the recent news of EU leaders being the chief guest at next year's Republic Day parade. Important update from the perspective of GS2 international relations. Another important article is about fertilizer subsidy being increased according to the latest cabinet decision. Important update from the perspective of GS3 agriculture part. In another important news, we have UN report, synthesis report in particular, which highlights world will even breach 2 degrees Celsius target which was set under the Paris climate agreement. So important update from the perspective of GS3 environment. Another article that is very vital from the perspective of GS3 economy is about Niti Aayog's recent report on India's service sector. Particularly in the decoded section, which is important from the perspective of mains, we are going to take a look at important article titled Early Warning System for Himalayan States. So important analysis from the perspective of particularly GS3 disaster management. Early warning system plays very important role when it comes to disaster management, adaptation, mitigation measures. To a certain extent, it is emerging as a very important aspect of disaster resilience as well. So stay tuned for that particular analysis as well. So the first article that we are going to discuss is about EU leaders being chief guest at next year's Republic Day parade. See, most of the time Republic Day and the chief guest which are invited to this particular event plays very important sort of role when it comes to India's diplomacy. It is very symbolic move. You must have seen, many important presidents of the states. At one time, we have seen even whole of ASEAN leaders being invited to our 2018 Republic Day parade as well. So what it indicates, it is despite being a symbolic move, it indicates it is sort of a power projection on India's side as well. Because many times, these visiting state dignitaries participate in the parade itself, so through their own military contingents. So it shows India's commitment towards, say, global south, at the same time India's commitment towards showing its diplomatic cards through soft power as well as hard power diplomacy. So to certain extent, now the EU leaders are being invited at the Republic Day parade next year. What it indicates is India's deepening embrace of European Union. Why is this news important? Because most of the time you must have seen the current Trump administration is actually changing the traditional transatlantic relationship. From the perspective of, say, India-US relations as well, the flux created by the Trump administration policies, whether it is trade relations or whether it is tariff policies of the Trump administration, the indications are such that the traditional reliance on US particularly is in tatters. So essentially, countries are moving towards forming new alliances, newer trade relationships, so that they reduce their dependence, overall dependence on United States. So one such bloc is also trying to increase its own or reduce its own over reliance on the United States. So that particular bloc is EU. So EU is, at the same time, currently EU is actually negotiating with India. The trade talks are at an advanced level. Our own, trade minister is in EU, European Union in particular, and he is giving a very beautiful sort of, lectures in those forums in EU particularly. What it indicates is a deepening personal level, talks also being developed between the two blocs, so that the relationship between India and EU goes to the next higher level. See, most of the time, why particularly India has now invited EU to the Republic Day parade, and there are indicators that both the leaders of EU, particularly the Council President, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, along with European Council President Mr. Costa, both of them will appear as our chief guest at the Republic Day parade. This is for the first time that these main EU leaders will be at our Republic Day chief guest parade. So essentially, it is sort of a historic announcement on the part of, say, India as well. So from the perspective of GS2 international relations, this particular news here is vital. You may get a direct question when it comes to means particularly from the perspective of prelims, you must know the EU countries. See, in our earlier episodes, we have also covered how EU is different from, say, European Commission. At the same time, what exactly is the difference between EU free trade area, how it is different from, say, the Schengen area, which countries are involved in those areas as well, and essentially what are the core members of European Union. These are very, very important questions from the perspective of prelims particularly. Now the thing is, EU contains 27 member countries. You must know each and every member country, because many times UPSC has this habit of asking, say they will give you the question, they will actually means mention some country names and how many of these countries are part of, say, European Union. Many times you assume that the country, if it is in Europe, it will be part of European Union. It is not so. There are 27 countries, and very interestingly, few countries have withdrawn in recent times from the European Union. Particularly, there is very famous example of Brexit. Apart from that, means very traditional countries like some Nordic countries are not part of EU. So remember that those 27 country names to certain extent from the perspective of prelims as well. So let's dive into the article itself. So now, in a first, India has invited the European Union's leadership. As I said, European Council President, at the same time EU Commission President. EU Commission is particularly the executive arm of the European Union. See, European Union is a political and economic union of, say, 27 European countries, which has been formed through the Maastricht Treaty in 1992. But earlier also there is one grouping. That grouping was expanded through Maastricht Agreement, Maastricht Treaty in 1992, and many more members were added, emerging out as, say, European Union. So Maastricht Treaty is associated with the formation of the European Union. Remember that. But earlier also there was a predecessor of EU which was in operation in 1950s as well as 1960s. Although the number of member countries in particular are way less. So now the process of the formal invitation of the official confirmation of acceptance is underway. So it will be confirmed in the upcoming days. So essentially what it indicates is the deepening embrace of New Delhi and Brussels. Shortly after the process is completed, we will get the confirmation of the confirmation of whether they will attend, both of them will attend or not. Currently the news is they will attend, but we are awaiting the confirmation process. An invitation to be a chief guest is highly symbolic, as I said earlier, but it carries weight when it comes to diplomacy. The choice is dictated by the number of reasons. As I earlier said, EU-India relations are on upswing. The choice is very strategic, it is diplomatic, it is business interest oriented. At the same time, it shows international geopolitics in action as well. The decision to invite the EU leadership is a first. Ties between India and the European Union, whose membership is almost 27 countries, have been in the upswing in the recent times. Since February, EU's College of Commissioners have visited India as well for trade talks. We have seen that particular development, and we have discussed that particular development in our earlier episodes of daily news analysis as well. But why there is a renewed momentum when it comes to India-EU relationship is because uncertainty over US commitment at the same time. See, the traditional transatlantic consensus has been long dead. Right after the election of the first term Trump presidency in 2016 itself, there was some sort of repercussions when it comes to, say, traditional bonhomie between, say, EU as well as US. So right after that, the second Trump administration now has actually completely changed the equation between these two countries. Although the ties between the two countries are still very deep, there is very much vast defense and security arrangement through NATO particularly. But at the same time, the traditional consensus is essentially in tatters because of Trump's policies, including trade negotiations, tariff policies, etc. At the same time, Russia-Ukraine war is also actually leading to more frictions between the two countries, two blocs particularly. So, amid the unpredictability of the US administration led by Mr. Trump, EU approved a new strategic agenda on October 20. In recent times, we have seen that has been approved a new strategic agenda. What it indicates is EU is also trying to diversify its own relationship, which is overly relying on, say, the United States, to raise the bilateral relationship with India to a higher level. So now what EU has done, EU has proposed new strategic agenda with respect to the India's bilateral relationship to include or to elevate India's ties to much more higher strategic level, which will include finalizing the free trade agreement. We are going to see whether India and EU finalize and seal the deal by this year's end on this particular FTA, and this will be one of the biggest FTAs ever. So to certain extent, we are very optimistic. The talks are ongoing. So from that perspective, there is this very strategic ambition of finalizing the free trade agreement, deepening cooperation across technology, defense and security, along with people to people ties. Many times, India's most valuable export is its people. So from the perspective of, say, migration also, to certain extent, migration in terms of, say, jobs, people to people ties and increasing the people to people ties is also will also hold important. So in fact, when EU leaders come to India in January, the India EU Leaders Summit, which was scheduled to be in early 2026, will be held in Delhi that month itself. So we are going to see the leadership summit between India and EU in January 26. So this pretty much coincides, the news of, say, Republic Day chief guest coincides with this particular EU leaders summit. So there will be some sort of overlap between these two events. This puts a deadline for the negotiators from both sides to conclude India EU FTA by December. So as I said, in upcoming 2 months, we are going to see whether India and EU put aside its major differences and come up with some sort of framework when it comes to free trade agreement. In terms of US uncertainty and tariff policies of the current Trump administration, this particular FTA will provide huge boost to the economies of both these blocs. To commit a commitment made in February this year as a part of the economic partnership between the two sides. So there was a commitment this year in February 2025 in particular. That commitment said that by this year's end, by December end, we will have the final India EU FTA. So let's look at some of the current developments now. As I said, India's Commerce Minister, Trade Minister, Mr. Piyush Goyal is currently in Brussels meeting the EU's Trade Commissioner. The Trade Commissioner described talks as intensive series of in-depth discussion. So the discussion, the personal level discussion, the personal level talks are currently ongoing. The two sides are working on the proposed India EU FTA. The high level contacts are robust, as I said. The people to people contacts in particular are there on the table, but more than that, it is the commitment of the leadership of the both India as well as EU, which is shining through. Essentially, Mr. Modi has travelled multiple times in recent months to the EU. India's External Affairs Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, will travel to Brussels in November, and his EU counterpart, Kaja Kallas, is expected in India in December and in early January as well. As I said, there is going to be India EU Leadership Summit in January 2026. The EU Foreign Minister, essentially will visit India at that point of time. So the leadership level contacts are very strong. The timing is significant despite differences on issues like Russian oil imports by India and India's stance on Ukraine. New Delhi sees the India-EU relationship as one where convergences outweighs divergence. Very true. Most of the time, there are divergent points like, both the countries does not agree upon, say, Russia-Ukraine war, or whether India should actually import Russian oil or not. But at the same time, convergences are very strong. As I said, the trade relationship is robust. EU is the second largest trade partner for India. At the same time, the volume of goods trade is around $135 to $140 billion. So it is a huge trade. The upcoming FTA will further increase this particular trade. Also important, the current US administration is signaled unpredictability, and Europe is positioning itself as predictable and reliable partner for India. Most of the time we have seen, India-US relations in particularly becoming more uncertain and unpredictable due to, say, the Trump's policies in recent times. What India wants is a more reliable and predictable partner. So that's what EU is trying to give to India, part of the broader strategic appeal for deeper India-EU strategic partnership. So essentially, in recent times, we have seen, EU coming up with, say, a strategic document. Apart from that, earlier we have seen India's EU's particularly Indo-Pacific strategy as well. Tradition of inviting chief guests at Republic Day parade. Let's look at, what exactly is this, Republic Day parade tradition. Every year on 26 January, India invites very important, the host country, being a host country, it invites the foreign head of states or government to be the chief guest at this particular very prestigious event. The chief guests attend the parade as part of the dignitaries on dais alongside Indian leadership. Very true. We have all seen the pictures in recent times. Particularly in 2025, the Indonesian president, Mr. Prabowo Subianto, was the chief guest for the Republic Day parade. The chief guest particularly comes up with his own country's military contingent, which may also participate in the parade, symbolizing the deeper bilateral cooperation between the two countries. The very first Republic Day parade in 1950 had Indonesia's president Sukarno as the chief guest. So this particular fact is also very important from the perspective of prelims. So first Republic Day parade way back in 1950 also has the Indonesian president Mr. Sukarno as the chief guest. Remember that. And in 2025, almost 75 years later, we have the Indonesian president Mr. Subianto. Remember that. In 2018 particularly, there is a special case. All the ASEAN member countries and their heads of states were jointly invited as the chief guest, highlighting a regional policy alignments and emphasis between India-ASEAN relationship. Recent selections reflect growing global partnerships, like 75th Republic Day in India in 2024 particularly saw the participation of French President Mr. Emmanuel Macron, who is, chief guest. And India-France relationship is very deep, very strategic at the same time. Particularly the defense partnership between the India and France goes way back. European Union and European Commission. Now let's look at some of the basics of European Union and European Commission. See, most of the time, this particular news analysis here is important from the perspective of, say, international relations. You may get a direct question when it comes to India-EU relationship. Remember that. But more than that, from the perspective of prelims, as I earlier said, you must know these very important, very strategic differences. So, EU is a political and economic union of 27 member European countries that have pooled some of their sovereignties to cooperate on things like trade, laws and common markets. Remember that. EU is the project of pooled sovereignty. So, essentially in some areas, in some aspects of, say, cooperation on things like trade, laws and common market, EU countries cooperate and collaborate. Okay, although the sovereignties have been pooled, the individual countries still have, pretty much their own laws as well. At the same time, there is a common market area, there is common, sort of trade area at the same time. It was built over decades via treaties like Maastricht Treaty, as I said, and today functions with that handles legislative, executive as well as judicial tasks for the Union. So, essentially executive through European Commission, legislative through European Council, and there is, when it comes to judiciary, there is EU judiciary as well, EU level judiciary. So, essentially what exactly is the Maastricht Treaty? As I said, it was signed way back in 1992. See, the Maastricht, this is the town in Netherlands, remember that. So, very weird sort of name, but it is there. Maastricht is in Netherlands. The treaty was signed on 7th February 1992. See, before that, there was a treaty on European Union, TEU. The Maastricht Treaty was signed in 1992. This entered into force on 1993. Although it was signed in 1992, it entered into force on 1 November 1993. Remember these facts. You may get a direct question in prelims in this regard. after the member states of the then European Economic Community ratified it. So before European Unions, there is European Economic Community, which was established way back in 1958-59. It marked a major step beyond purely economic cooperation among European states, goods, services, capital, towards deeper political engagement and cooperation. Very true. The treaty formally established the European Union structure, as I said, as we currently know, the Council, the Commission, etc. This particular, structure of, say, European Union will find, the basic is found in this particular Maastricht Treaty. Some argued the treaty left certain unfinished or unambiguous area as it is. For example, defense policy, full political union, and was seen as a compromise rather than full federalization. There is no full federalization. As I said, there are always the issue of, say, to what extent the European Union is fully federalized. It is not so. It is a project which involved pooled sovereignty between the 27 European Union countries. The ratification was not smooth in all member states. So, this is very interesting fact here. See, the Maastricht Treaty, although signed in 1992, it was, it came into force in 1993. So, almost one and a half years later, it came into being. Why is it so? Because the ratification was not done immediately by all members. There is very famous example of Denmark here. In Denmark, the initial referendum was rejected by people, prompting an opt-out agreement, the Edinburgh Agreement in particular. So, it could be later be approved. So, essentially most of the time, initially there was very little sort of awareness of what it will actually include or inculcate when it comes to that particular country. So, people does not actually back the referendum of, say, accepting the membership of European Union at that point of time, particularly when it comes to Denmark. But there was opt-out that called Edinburgh Agreement, so that at latter times when the awareness was there to certain extent, the political, the economic benefits are visible to people. So, at that point of time, this particular agreement could again then be put in front of the people, so that it can be approved again, and it has been done so that way. So, there is this very important Maastricht Treaty, remember that, which essentially actually established European Union in 1992. Although before that also there was European Economic Community, remember that. It is not like suddenly European Union came into being in 1992. Earlier there was European Economic Community, remember that. Some key features of European Union include free movement of goods, services, people and capital among member states. They have agreed by the treaties to share their own sovereignty through the institutions of European Union like Council and Commission. State governments must agree unanimously in the Council for the Union to adopt some policies. For others, collective decisions are made by qualified majority voting. For in some aspects like defense, for that matter, there needs to be unanimity in Council. But there are other decisions which can be done through, say, qualified majority voting as well. The European Commission is one of the institutions of the EU, specifically EU's executive arm. So, essentially European Commission, what its job is to propose new EU laws and policies, implement and manage day-to-day operations of the EU and its budget, look after its budget obviously, ensure that EU treaties are laws are actually adhered to and respected by the member countries, negotiate international agreements. So, this particular aspect is very important. In recent times, that is why we have seen, our own Trade Minister, Commerce Minister, Mr. Piyush Goyal, say, discussing things with the EU Trade Commissioner as well. So, why? Because EU Council, or rather EU Commission, its executive arm, has the authority to negotiate international agreements like trade agreements, particularly free trade agreements on behalf of the whole of EU. So, as I earlier said, very important to know are the countries in the EU. You may get a direct question. As I said earlier, there was European Economic Community, EEC, which goes way back in 1958 with 6 founding members. Who are these founding members of, say, European Economic Community that has been converted through Maastricht Treaty in 1992 into European Union? So, who are these members of EEC, which was established way back in 1992 with 6 members, 1958 with 6 members? Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands and Germany. obviously at that point of time East Germany. So these are the members of European Economic Community, which was established in 1958, and post Maastricht Treaty in 1992, this particular economic community was expanded to now include almost 27 countries. Remember, very, very important. So this is very interesting and important practice question for you. Just comment your answer in the comment section. So look at the question carefully, look at the countries carefully for this particular question. So the next important article that we are going to discuss is about fertilizer subsidy. So what has happened now, that the cabinet has decided to, Union cabinet obviously, to increase the fertilizer subsidy for the winter crops. So nutrient based fertilizers particularly will get 38,000 crores of subsidy. So in most of the time, India's subsidy burden is huge. You must have observed almost 9 to 10% of the GDP is spent on, say, the overall subsidies. Particularly farm subsidy is also huge. In it, the fertilizer subsidy is also very huge. So essentially, what is the issue with subsidy is it actually reduces the scope for the capital investments. So many times the capital investments which are long term, which are more employment intensive, at the same time which are asset generating, suffer. Why? Because the subsidy burden is huge. See, the subsidy burden will give some immediate boost through, they say, the consumption sort of boom, but at the same time for the long term capital investment we need to reduce our subsidy burden. So subsidy rationalization is suggested. So that's why our union government is also going towards that path, but at the same time the subsidy burden when it comes to fertilizers is also very huge. See, most of the time it is the product of the fertilizer subsidy in particular is the product of, say, the import cost of the fertilizers. Many times you must have known that India is the largest importer of urea in the whole world, and Indian farmers overuse urea. Most of the time, means you must have seen the overuse of urea, particularly those students who are from, say, rural areas. Many times just farmers use so much urea. कुछ कुछ खेती में कुछ प्रॉब्लम है, यूरिया यूज करो. So essentially why does it happen is because of lack of, say, awareness among farmers when it comes to agri extension services. Many people or many farmers are not aware of, say, the land degradation, soil degradation problem associated with urea. So although government is working on it through, say, neem coating of urea, but at the same time urea is not part of nutrient based subsidy. Remember that. Currently we have, when it comes to fertilizer subsidy issue, there is nutrient based subsidy and there is, urea is directly subsidized. It is not part of nutrient based subsidy. Nutrient based subsidy is particularly is a subsidy which is decided on the percentage of nutrients particularly available in that particular fertilizer. For example, NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potash. So these three sort of main fertilizers, nutrients particularly, are needed for the soil. If the fertilizer involve these particular nutrients, the subsidy is given by the government to the companies. So it is not given to the farmers, remember that. So essentially the difference, the retail price and the difference in, say, the international markets is given as a subsidy through, say, the percentage of, say, nutrient which is there in that particular fertilizer. So that's what that is what the concept of nutrient based fertilizer subsidy is, nutrient based regime particularly of fertilizer subsidy. On the other hand, urea is sort of not part of nutrient based subsidy regime. Very important, please keep that in mind. You see, essentially most of the time why urea is not part of nutrient based subsidy scheme is because it is very sensitive issue. Most of the time, fluctuations in urea and the fluctuations in prices of urea directly results the farmers income. So that's why government tries to maintain the prices of urea. You must have seen since 2018 the prices of 45 kg of urea's one bag hasn't been changed much, although internationally due to, say, Russia-Ukraine war or other issues, the urea prices have skyrocketed. So how government is managing this? How government is managing this is through, say, providing huge subsidies to the urea manufacturers. So we have to, reduce our subsidy burden. We have to reduce, or we have to rationalize our subsidy burden. We have to start with, say, how we can reduce our over dependence on urea particularly. So that's why, neem coating of urea is one way to actually go about it, and government has fully implemented it. At the same time, what government has done is it has actually stopped leakage. Why? Because there is Aadhaar based payment system, and there is point of sale machines which actually provide, say, the much needed transparency and accountability when it comes to fertilizer subsidy regime. So when it comes to the news itself now, the Union Cabinet has decided to provide almost 38,000 crore as a subsidy for the ongoing Rabi crops for the winter season. The subsidy on phosphorus and sulfur fertilizer was increased by this much crore. You do not have to remember it, but at the same time, the most important thing is for the Rabi crops, the subsidy has been increased. The Union Minister, Mr. Ashwini Vaishnav, said that NBS subsidy will promote balanced use of fertilizers. Very true. Regarding the benefits, he added availability of fertilizers to farmers at subsidized, affordable and reasonable prices will be ensured. A rationalization of subsidy on P and K's fertilizers in view of recent trends in the international prices of fertilizers and inputs. So government is trying to rationalize, but it is not able to, say, fully rationalize the subsidy regime itself. Although P and K fertilizers through, say, nutrient based scheme particularly, it has tried to reduce the overall burden. The subsidy on P and K fertilizers, including DAP, particularly diammonium phosphate, and NPKs, nitrogen, phosphorus, potash and sulfur grades, will be provided based on approved rates for Rabi 25-26, which has been which is applicable from, say, upcoming 1st October 25 to, say, next March 2026. So not that much important this point. So another important thing to understand here is, in all, 28 grades of P and K fertilizers are covered under NBS subsidy regime. Almost 28 grades of P and K fertilizers are covered under nutrient based subsidy scheme or regime. So nutrient based subsidy regime is a policy adopted by the government where subsidy is provided, as I earlier said, based on the nutrients present in the fertilizer rather than a fertilizer as a whole. So according to the nutrient and its percentage in that fertilizer, the subsidy will be provided directly to the company that produces that particular fertilizer. Remember that. It has been actually introduced way back in 2010 to what is the purpose? To ensure balanced use of fertilizers. Many times, due to lack of awareness, many people, or rather many farmers, overuse, say, nitrogen fertilizers in the soil where nitrogen is not needed at all, or for, say, potash, or say sulfur for that matter. So means, the governments means just connect the things when it comes to farm subsidies and schemes. So there is soil health card scheme as well. What soil health card will indicate is, say, the lack of nutrients in that particular soil. If you actually test the soil in the lab, the farmer will get to know what exactly is the issue in its soil, in his or her soil. So essentially, most of the times, accordingly, the farmer will purchase the fertilizer. See, most of the time you must have seen, means, say, the fertilizer, particularly the chemical fertilizer needed for, say, that particular land, means the soil health card indicated that nitrogen is less. So the farmer will take, say, one bag of, say, the fertilizer which includes nitrogen, not just, say, urea. Most of the time potash is also less in Indian farmlands because of, say, overuse and monocropping issues. So many times, accordingly, if soil health card is there and means there is a regular checking of the health of the soil, this overuse of subsidy or overuse of fertilizers will get reduced. But to certain extent, soil health card means need to be much more implemented, need to be much more on a ground level. See, many times, 1 or 2 times farmer actually check the soil in the lab and the soil health card gets updated. But after, say, 4 years, 5 years, the farmer doesn't go to lab again, and get the soil health card updated. So there are many, means the government is incentivizing the use of soil health card, but that is very questionable thing. There are many implementation loopholes when it comes to soil health card. So focus on nutrients in the NBS regime. Subsidy is given on the primary nutrients in particular in the fertilizers NPK and S. Flexibility in prices. The fertilizers companies set retail prices based on nutrient cost. Government reimburses the subsidy portion directly to the companies. Remember that. So it is not like the government reimburses the farmers. The government reimburses the difference to the companies directly. Balanced fertilization use. Direct benefit to fertilizer companies, very important. As I said, there are point of sale machines. Types of fertilizers covered. Urea is not under NBS regime, fixed pricing, but it is under fixed pricing. But others like DAP, MOP, SSP, NPK fertilizers are under NBS. Remember that. Advantages obviously promote balanced nutrient use, reduces distortion in fertilizer pricing, or help control subsidy expenditure. Efficient fertilizer production as well it promotes. There are certain limitations like lack of awareness, regular monitoring is an issue. Overuse of urea, it is always a problem, and urea is not part of NBS. So to certain extent, how urea is subsidized then? Urea is not part of NBS. Urea subsidy regime is a government funded scheme. It is government funded scheme to provide urea to farmers at a fixed subsidized maximum retail price. Currently it is 242 for 45 kg of bag. So it is still very much subsidized. See, in international markets, as I said, Russia being one of the largest producers of say urea, and means it is being under sanctions, the urea prices skyrocketed like crazy. But despite that, India being the largest importer of say urea, the prices were not increased proportionately. It was still around 250, 245, 250 range for 45 kg bag. Why? Because there is direct subsidy support by the union government when it comes to urea. So India is the largest importer of urea, sourcing mainly from Qatar, UAE, Egypt to meet its domestic demand. Although there are chemical fertilizer companies, urea production does happen in India particularly. Just comment in which states you can find these urea fertilizer companies, or which is the largest state in India which produces highest amount of urea in the comment section. So NPK, this chart indicates here the role of NPK. What exactly is the nitrogen does, phosphorus does, potash. For example, phosphorus in particular, deficiency, poor root growth, delayed maturity, and purplish leaves. So if you observe purplish leaves and poor root growth, what is missing in that particular crop is phosphorus. For nitrogen, the deficiency indicates yellowing of leaves and stunted growth. So if you see the yellowing of leaves and stunted growths in the crop, what is missing is nitrogen, or what is less is nitrogen. So when it comes to potash, weak stems, browning of leaf edges, reduced yield to certain extent indicates potassium deficiency in the crop. Remember that. So very important. This chart here, this slide here indicates the difference between Kharif and Rabi crops. Very traditional sort of question when it comes to agriculture part in prelims. So examples you must know. See, most of the time Kharif crops are sown on the onset of monsoon, while the Rabi crops is essentially winter crops. So they are sown in winter, October to November month, and they are harvested by March and April, while Kharif crops are harvested by September, October. Remember that. Examples here are important. Kharif crop, rice, maize, millets, cotton, sugarcane and soybean are examples of Kharif crops. Rabi crops example, wheat, barley, mustard, chickpea, peas. These are the examples of Rabi crops. Remember that. Very, very important, very easy. At the same time, people get confused all the time in this particular very easy sort of question. So this is practice question for you. Just comment your answer in the comment section. Very important question here. The next important article is about UN synthesis report. So what the report finds is the UN report finds is the commitment given by the countries under the Paris Agreement have not been fulfilled fully, because world is on the path of breaching that 2 degrees Celsius gateway. So there is very famous United Nations chief's statement saying, what he said is, world is going towards gateway to climate hell. So that is really, really important. He describes the current trajectory as gateway to climate health. The synthesis report again shows we are on the precipice of this particular catastrophe. So what it indicates is the countries are poised to reduce emissions by only 17% of 2019 level by 2035. This particular synthesis report right before COP30, which will happen in the Belém, Brazil, is very important. What it indicates is there is just 17% chance, or 17% the emissions will be reduced by 17%, particularly by 2019 levels, although well below that what is required to keep both to keep the earth from heating up to 1.5 degrees Celsius or even 2 degrees Celsius. The 2 degrees Celsius is very far away. Now, to keep the temperatures below these limits, countries, how much emissions they have to cut is by 37 and 57% by 2019 level by 2035. But what is the current trajectory indicates, it is just 17%. So if we want to, not breach say 1.5 degrees Celsius target, we have to target 57% reduction of 2019 level. So we are way off. See, we are almost 1/3 means off the target. Currently we are at 17%, but what is needed to actually not breach 1.5 degrees Celsius target is 57% reduction of 2019 levels by 2035. The synthesis report itself is based on countries' updated NDCs. See, nationally determined contributions, NDCs particularly, are very important. Sort of these are the annual commitments given by the countries, which is mandated by the Paris Climate Agreement of 2015, which are commitments to reduce fossil fuel emissions or plant forests to capture CO2 until 2035. So essentially, it gives certain sort of targets per country. See, there is the principle of proportionate responsibility. As of September 30, only 64 out of potential 190 countries have updated or submitted updated NDCs. India has not yet submitted its updated NDCs since its last submission in August 2022. So in particular, when it comes to updated NDCs of India, we have Panchamrit targets, which are given by our Prime Minister in Glasgow Summit COP26 in particular. Means we have already discussed so much about Panchamrit. So what it indicates is the reducing emissions intensity of GDP by 45% by 2030, 2005 levels obviously, achieving around 50% cumulative installed electric power capacity from non-fossil fuel based energy sources by 2030, promotion of initiatives like lifestyle for environment. So life came in COP26 Glasgow. Remember this particular fact here, important from the perspective of prelims. Many times, you may get a direct question in this regard. So India's updated NDCs, although India hasn't submitted yet, there are, some commitments regarding that in Panchamrit targets of 2022. While the discussions ahead of climate COP, particularly COP13 Brazil, emphasizes emissions reductions, the submitted NDCs highlights adaptation and resilience being adopted with by 73% adoption component include adaptation and resilience. So not just mitigation, at the same time what countries are actually focusing on, adaptation and resilience. So disaster resilience is being focused. So almost 70% of the component of say the plan or emission target is actually adaptation and disaster resilience. So very interesting and important sort of aspect of say management of disasters. Adaptation refers to measures countries must take to cope with the ongoing and future impacts of say climate crisis. Very true. Most of the time it is assumed that the climate crisis is means we cannot escape it. So to certain extent what we can do is focus on say the adaptation and resilience, disaster resilience part, climate resilience part. So on the report notes that all NDCs go beyond mitigation, include elements on adaptation, finance, technology transfer, capacity building and addressing loss and damage. So in recent times we have seen the establishment of loss and damage fund as well. Just comment in the comment section in which particular COP summit we have the establishment of loss and damage fund. Very important from the perspective of prelims. In terms of GHG reductions, the report says the implementation of new NDCs is projected to reduce the emissions to around 13 billion tons of CO2 equivalent by 2035, which is 6% below previous NDC commitment. So, we have to go up, but current commitments show we are way almost 6% below the earlier NDC commitments. The report identifies, what report identifies as a solution is afforestation, reforestation, adding solar energy as some sort of solutions. Several countries have announced domestic pledges and projects including tripling global renewable energy capacity by 2030. Some countries have done that. Enhancing low carbon hydrogen production, particularly promotion of say green hydrogen. We have our own national green hydrogen mission, and expanding CCUS, carbon capture, utilization and storage. So, essentially CCUS is also emerging as a way of say mitigating the harmful effects of climate change. So, to certain extent CCUS, although a good project, it looks very good on paper, but its actual achievement and result on the ground are very, very contentious. CCUS, what it stands for, carbon capture, utilization and storage. See, it is a very simple concept. Essentially, as I said, it looks simple on the paper, but doing it actually, through say the actual project or the actually ground level work is very difficult to actually assess the utility of such projects. So, what components is it involved? Obviously, carbon capture first. Carbon capture, CO2 is separated from industrial or power plant emissions, or there can be direct capture from the atmosphere itself. See, technology is involved. We are not going to discuss the technology part. So, essentially CO2 is separated and captured. So, that is carbon capture. Then it is utilization, carbon utilization. Captured CO2 is used in commercial products, for example, enhanced oil recovery, concrete and building materials, and synthetic and fuel chemicals. To certain extent, you can utilize the actually captured carbon in these ways. Then there is carbon storage as well, carbon utilization or storage to certain extent, and storage is also possible. CO2 is injected into underground geological formations. There can be natural formations, geological formations, for example, deep saline aquifers, unminable coal seams, or depleted oil and gas reservoirs can also be used as a storage facility for say captured carbon. So, all these techniques combinedly called CCUS. Already UPSC has asked direct questions in mains particularly on this. Say most of the time stored CO2 remains trapped for centuries. That is very true. So, CCUS is a promising technology, but to certain extent it has challenges like high cost of capture, robust monitoring, or to ensure CO2 doesn't leak. What if there is a leak from say the storage area? Energy intensive process, it is pretty much energy intensive. So, what exactly is the output input ratio required is very problematic. Public concerns about underground storage safety itself is also very questionable. So, many times CCUS is being adopted as say helping country to meet its Paris climate agreement targets without shutting down essential industries, but it is emerging or rather it is accused of some form of greenwashing by many environmentalists. So, we are going to see whether it is greenwashing or not, but globally there are some projects of CCUS in US, Norway, Canada, Australia and Middle East. India is also trying its own when it comes to CCUS on industrial hubs, coal-based plants and steel fertilizer sectors. India plans to integrate CCUS with low carbon hydrogen production. For example, India's promotion of say green hydrogen to achieve net zero target by 2070. This is also one of the Panchamrits. So, some important aspects of Paris Agreement: limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, well below 2 degrees Celsius, that is one. There is submit NDCs every 5 years, there is second. Then there is global stock take every 5 years, remember that, global stock take every 5 years. Technology transfer and development is also promoted. Market and non-market approaches, particularly Article 6 here is very important of Paris Climate Agreement. What it says or what it allows is say the trade in carbon credits. So, essentially marketable and non-marketable approaches to say climate change, to greenhouse gas emission, and what sort of market mechanisms there can be to fund the climate projects. So, Article 6 actually gives some of these solutions. So, it allows carbon credits as well. Remember that UPSC has already asked question on Article 6 in prelims in recent times. This is a very important practice question for you. Just comment your answer in the comment section. So, the next important article and very important from the perspective of GS3 economy is Niti Aayog report saying service sector employs 30% of India's workforce. Very important from the perspective of say overall employment intensity of the sector. Services sector contributes almost more than half of GDP, but it only employs about 30% of Indian workforce. So, 1/3 of Indian workforce. See, most of the time global average is at 50%. So, but India's average is just 30%. So, it shows that Indian service sector needs to become more employment intensive. So, there are some of the interesting and important sort of solutions are suggested in the Niti Aayog report as well. So, India's services sector employs 30% of the country's workforce. The Niti Aayog report titled India's services sector insights from the employment trends and state level dynamics further said that services remain the mainstay of India's employment growth and post-pandemic recovery. But the challenges to services sector persist. Service employment rose to 29.7% in 2023-24. Remember these facts. You must support your arguments with facts when it comes to GS3 economy answers, compared to say 26.9% in 2011-12. So, in say last 6 years, 40 million jobs were created in the services sector. So, this achievement itself is huge and it has been actually highlighted by the Niti Aayog report. Although there are certain challenges, but 40 million jobs in last 6 years is a huge number. Although it still accounted for the 1/3 of Indian workforce. Although the services sector accounts for more than half of India's 330 trillion rupees economic output, the sector employs only 1/3 of country's workforce. As I said, Niti Aayog stated in report that India's services sector expansion has been more output intensive than employment intensive. As I said, focus is more on output, not employment, indicating a disconnect between gross value added in the economy and job creation. So, essentially the concern is always output, just gross value addition, and not, or the priority is not employment generation. Although in this output oriented process, 40 million jobs were created since 2011-12, rather in last 6 years itself. The report's findings in that regard are also very important. See, India employs 188 million people in the services sector. This also is very important. It's the data. Just note down some of the data points here. Niti Aayog emphasizes on creating well-paid jobs in the services sector as a significant, because the manufacturing sector has been the poor performer in recent times and it has been the government focus all along. See, post 1991 economic reforms, the manufacturing sector in particular has been stagnated. Most of the time, manufacturing sector is the one where the employment intensity is very high, but it is the stagnated sector post 1991 economic reforms. Although services picked up, but it is not employment intensive sector, the services sector, because there is an element of wage growth involved in services sector. However, increased automation and capital intensive expansion of factories mean reduced industrial output and requirements in the manufacturing sector. So, the AI and automation and robotics has sort of played very important role when it comes to limited success of say manufacturing sectors. Uncertainties in global trade due to tariffs and geopolitical issues, particularly Trump tariffs now has also affected manufacturing sector, particularly export sector, or which employs huge number of people, is also facing issues. So, that's why Niti Aayog report particularly focuses on creating more employment in service sector itself. So, according to Niti Aayog, India needs a new policy approach that treats services as central pillar of India's or country's employment strategy rather than a residual sector. So, Niti Aayog bats for the services sector to be central pillar of India's employment generation drive. So, essentially it is not just a residual section. We need to shift our policy focus towards services sector. So, what are some of the solutions suggested? Essentially, to fill up the rural-urban divide, gender divide, regional disparities, the need for employment strategy focused on formalization, inclusion and productivity. See, formalization, inclusion and productivity is also very important here. See, most of the time formalization is a problem. So, the think tank emphasized boosting employment in the services sector, suggesting measures like formalizing the sector, extending social protection to gig workers, self-employed people, MSMEs, etc., and improving job quality. See, as I said, gig workers doesn't have the formalized sort of job. What do I mean by it? Gig workers most of the time, are employed based on say contracts, and many times self-employed people or even MSMEs face these issues of say non-formalization. So, Niti Aayog report bats for formalizing the sector so that job quality in these particular gig sectors gets improved. Targeted skilling, digital infrastructure and safe mobility are also key to enabling women and rural youth access to high growth services as well. Very true. That's why the metro development, the various cities and the mobility issue particularly is also very vital. Investments in technology-led skilling and balanced regional growth are also very critical. Traditional services like trade, transport and education still dominate employment but are slowing in job creation, while modern services like IT, finance and professional services offer high productivity and wage but are limited in scale as well. So, if we want to achieve Viksit Bharat by 2047, service sector must drive equitable employment intensive development. See, most of the time, as I said, we need to centralize the services sector as our employment generation sector. Globally, services sector has seen a robust growth in last decades, like 50% growth by 2022 according to ILO report, but the Indian service sector has been stuck at 30-31%. So, remember these particular facts, very important from the perspective of say mains, particularly prelims as well. So, this is very important practice question for you. Just comment your answer in the comment section. So, in the decoded section, we are going to discuss early warning system for Himalayas. Why there is very less focus on say early warning system when it comes to disaster management aspect of say in Himalayan states. See, most of the time we all know that climate change is having disproportionate impact when it comes to Himalayas. So, Himalayan states in particularly faces the full fury, the full brunt of all sorts of disasters. In recent times, we have seen flash floods, there are glacial lake outburst floods, there are a few years back there were huge wildfires. Now, sometimes there are threats of droughts in Himalayan states as well. So, considering all these disaster prone areas or hazards in Himalayan states, so what is the most unique challenge when it comes to disaster management aspect is say lack of well developed early warning system. So, even the early warning of few hours also will actually save many lives. So, climate change and development works have made the Himalayas acutely vulnerable to floods. Very true. Landslides, particularly lake outburst floods, killing hundreds of people in recent times. Why are early warning system not a priority? That's the very valid question. As I said, it saves lives. Scientists say that a network of rugged, easy to operate early warning system to monitor activity across the Himalayan mountain is very essential. So, from the perspective of disaster management, this particular point is very, very important. See, most of the time there are pretty much repeated themes all along when it comes to disaster management questions, but this is something new that you must actually try to get a hang of. So, essentially, early warning system now is very important when it comes to disaster management, and it is important aspect of say disaster resilience as well. Setting up an early warning system for the Himalayas poses some very unique challenges. There has been increase in disasters in Himalayas in recent times. So, there is some sort of data that has been given in the article. You can see, let me tell you one of the data here. Of the 687 disasters of the country experienced between 1900 and 2022, as many as 240 were in Himalayas according to the 2024 Down to Earth report. So, this particular stat here is very important. So, according to DTE report, Down to Earth report, almost 240 disasters were happened in Himalayas itself. So, they include glacial lake outburst floods, landslides, wildfires, etc. Between 1902 and 1962, the region recorded just 5 disasters. So you can clearly see the shift or the impact of climate change on, say, the intensity or the number of disasters in recent decades. So Himalayan crisis in that regard is very, very vital to know here. The Himalayan region has seen a rapid increase in disasters over the decades, rising from 11 disasters in 1963 to 72 period to 68 in 2013 to 22. So essentially in last 10 decades, we have seen 68 disasters in Himalayan states or Himalayan regions. On the other hand, there is one data of 1963 to 1972, which has shown that there are just 11 disasters. So it is like, 6 times more growth in number of disasters in recent times, which accounts for 44% of all disasters reported in India. So almost, in last decade, 44 to 45% of disasters have happened just in the Himalayan states. So between 2007 and 2017, the region experienced 1121 landslide events. Remember that. This is the data by NASA. So according to the NASA's data, landslide numbers or events are numbered 1121 in just 10 years of 2007 to 2017. See, note down some of the data points. You can effectively utilize such data points in your answers. Climate change is making the Himalayas increasingly unpredictable and uncertain. Very true. With the region warming at 0.15 degrees Celsius to 0.6 degrees Celsius per decade, faster than the global average. So Himalayas are warming faster than the global average. This is pretty much well established fact by now. Witness report unusual and extreme weather patterns, particularly highlighting the growing vulnerability of this seismically very active region. Despite this, the number of early warning systems remains abysmally low in Himalayas, limiting the ability to predict disasters and save lives in one of the most volatile regions of the world. So there is a dire need of early warning systems. Particularly currently there is no indigenous low cost weatherproof easy to install EWS systems that can be operated by local communities. So we need the involvement of local communities so that early warning systems become much more, sort of community oriented, integrated with multiple input parameters and transmit live data from remote valleys beyond mobile networks reach. So that's why, community participation and local people participation in evolving these EWS is very important. Monitoring the 2,400 kilometer Himalayan range is obviously challenging because of the challenging terrain, climatic conditions. Drones have also very limited localized importance. Satellites are very expensive and data collection needs to be rapid as well. So these are some of the challenges when it comes to early warning systems and their developments. Artificial intelligence models can help in this regard, which can transfer live data into credible warnings. Involving and training local communities to operate EWS and respond to warning is crucial for saving lives in the volatile region. So what the article argues is early warning system is very important. The community participation, the local people participation, and skilling and training these local people participation in how to utilize this early warning system, and so that the live data is actually transferred to the remotest valleys of the region is very, very important. So early warning system, for example, to monitor earthquake, landslides, snowstorms, glacial lake outburst flood, extreme temperature events across 12 Indian states and union territories in the region needs to be developed. So use of hazard map, apart from say EWS map, EWS particularly early warning system, the article also suggests use of hazard maps. So what are these hazard maps? So hazard maps are prepared say through the historical data with flood depth and velocity created. For example, this has been there. Suppose the hazard map of that particular GLOF is created, then this particular map will guide the evacuation, prevention and infrastructure and economic planning in the upcoming times. So hazard map concept is good, but we need to actually map each and every of these vulnerable regions and vulnerable areas so that we can actually accordingly plan our own disaster management strategies. So in central Himalayas, researchers developed an early warning system for GLOF at Sirenmeko using an unmanned boat. So this particular Sirenmeko is a glacial, moraine dammed lake, particularly on the India-China border. So they have developed EWS system there, which is working fine. The system monitors lake level changes and end moraine displacement, etc., etc. So it is pretty much possible to have the successful EWS even for the GLOF events. So that's why, hazard map and mapping these very important moraine dammed lakes is also very, very vital, so that EWS systems become more robust. Additionally, India has been implementing 3 EWS projects. Where are exactly these 3 EWS projects? Including the system funded by the Environment Ministry that provides advanced high resolution hailstorm alerts to apple orchard managers in Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh. Particularly, at a small scale, India is actually developing EWS projects. These systems demonstrate that EWS can save lives and reduce economic and societal impact, particularly of disasters in high-risk mountainous regions. So, EWS does, save lives. That's why for disaster management, it is emerging as very important aspect. So, to conclude, the Himalayan early warning system combines local data, AI-aided predictions, and rigorously downscaled atmospheric models capable of capturing local land surface and hydrometeorological process. The urgency of developing these systems is tremendous, which has been shown by recent climate change predictions, which shows that 90% of the Himalayas could face drought lasting over a year if global warming systems rise by 3 degrees Celsius. If there is a rise by 3 degrees Celsius, it is pretty much possible that world will actually warm by 3 degrees Celsius. 90% of the Himalayas will face droughts which will last more than 1 year. So that's why, early warning system will help in that regard as well. Wildlife is facing altitude squeeze. See, most of the time, due to the warming, the species which are found at a lower altitude are moving up. That's why, there is a squeeze at, say, the more upper altitude. So, for example, musk deer and snow trout are, there is migration to higher elevation so that they can escape, say, the more heat at the ground level. Despite these pressing risks, Himalayan catastrophes are not receiving adequate attention. We have to pay the attention to development of early warning systems. Expert emphasize that establishing robust EWS in the Himalayas is an urgent national priority to protect lives and livelihoods. So that's why, when it comes to disaster risk resiliency, early warning system is also important aspect of effective risk reduction. So this is very important practice question for you. That's it from my side, and stay tuned for another edition of Daily News Analysis. Thank you.